This is gonna be, we're gonna go over why or what's the better alternative for high intent weighted ball training. Okay, so, but we want you to get involved. So right now, hold on to your questions and let's focus questions on this better alternative or your opposition to it or whatever you want. I mean, let's make this an open forum, but we're gonna get started. So let's look at someone that would want to use high intent weighted ball training. So obviously it's typically around velocity enhancement. So they believe that adding more weight to the arm will help increase the ability to throw the lighter ball faster, which there is tons of studies that show that there's a good correlation that this will happen. So that you can take that weighted ball and it will be a velocity enhancement tool. So I understand that, but here's the risks, right? We're in a sport that already has a pattern of injury. So in this sport, if we look at the major league level, we're seeing guys continuously.
Not just at the major league level too.
Right, well, I'm using the major league level because it's something we hear all the time. Constant forearm strains to UCL sprains to UCL tears. Then guys fall into labrum tears. Matt Marksberry, a Hagel lesion, rotator cuff tears. By God, that's the worst one, what I had. Okay, so we have in this sport a pattern of injury. There's a very good chance you are going to get injured in this sport. And then we look at the studies, and a lot of the studies say, where's the injury coming from? It's throwing hard, it's throwing a lot. ASMI takes it further and says it's poor physical fitness, poor pitching mechanics. But a lot of overuse is in there, which poor physical fitness and poor pitching mechanics actually makes the overuse come quicker. So at the end of the day, overuse is a big part of it. So we're throwing too much. ASMI says you can't throw more than 8 months out of the year because you're 5 times more likely to have injury. If you throw fatigued, you're 36 times more likely to have injury. So, big overuse problem in this pattern of injury. So when you get out of that 8 months of baseball, which a lot of guys have a hard time getting out of, what do you do? What do you do for those 4 months? Do you just sit on your butt? No, because sitting on your butt means total atrophy. Means your arm, it's the tissue inflammation is going down, but it's not getting stronger. Your glutes aren't getting stronger, your core is not getting strong. So obviously not sit on your butt. Yes, it's do something, be active, but at the same time too, if I want to play at the next level, I can't just do something to stay active and stay who I was. I've got to enhance to get better. So what do I do to enhance to get better? Obviously at the end of the day, I want to get better at the skill. I get this. I want to get better at velocity. I get this. But do we do that by more throwing, and not only more throwing, but more extreme throwing, which then goes against all the cautionary tales that we shouldn't be throwing more than we already are. And that's the problem. That's why we need a better alternative to player development in the off season than more throwing this ball, a 7-ounce ball, 9-ounce ball, 11-ounce ball, throwing this ball as far as we can. It's hard. We need something else besides throwing this ball. And that's why I created the 3X programs. Tore my rotator cuff, 18 years old. Doctor said, you'll never play again. I pick up a ball, I throw it that far. I'm like, how am I gonna ever play again? Not only throw again, but get to a professional level where my dreams wanted me to go. And the more I wanted to just throw again like I did before, the more it hurt, the worse it got. I realized I needed an alternative. I needed a better alternative to just throwing, because it just brings me down the same road back to injury. And that's the stories that we just heard of Noah, the interview with Noah, 15 years old, blows his arm out. We had another kid come on the other day. One injury after the other from extreme throwing approaches. They only are gonna make things worse. If you're in one now and you're having great success, it's just a matter of time, people. It's a matter of time when it tears or it breaks down again. So is there a way to enhance velocity? Is there a way to enhance pitching performance without throwing? Yes, there is a way. There is a way to do that without throwing at all, or there's a way of doing it with low stress throwing, and that's what we want to talk about. Okay, so when we throw that extreme weighted ball, and typically when a lot of us throw and we're in poor physical fitness and we're in poor mechanics, and what makes the overuse more of a problem, studies show it's more the arm doing the work. So obviously, we need to get the rest of the body involved. And that's where most of this better alternative comes from, is the overuse is wearing this down, and poor pitchers typically use this more than others. So the way we can enhance our performance levels without using this is learning how to use the rest of the body, which all the studies show. We have to use more legs, we have to use more trunk, because a lot of us use the same arm pass as the big leaguers. We just don't use the same hip pass, the same trunk pass as the big leaguers. So that's where we can go to create a better alternative to enhance performance without ragging this guy out or overusing this guy. Okay? So like I said, a lot of these high intent throws are taking your already poor ability to use your hips and trunk and exaggerating the problem, and then you wind up injured. Okay? Or you wind up over time injured. Maybe not in that training session, but later that year you wind up injured.
Staying in your overcompensation, which will be good.
Yeah. So where do we start? We start first learning how to incorporate the rest of the body, how to engage the hips, how to engage the trunk. Okay. A lot of, like I said, once again, a lot of these weighted ball approaches are ignoring that. They're just telling you to throw more of this. They're not ignoring the problems you have in the hips and trunk. So that's where we start. That's where the better alternative starts. It starts in legs and trunk. So where do we go? First, what we would do is we would do an assessment to see how bad it actually is. We would look at your hips. We would measure your hips. We would look at the muscle activity. How did the glutes fire to the quads? How do the calves get involved? How does the trunk work? Does the core, does it stabilize the trunk? Does it allow you to load the trunk? Okay. Once we identify that, then programming in our strength and conditioning, which we're not going to talk about today, is a huge, gigantic piece of this approach. We go into our strength approach and we build in the glutes. We build in more posterior chain. We build in more core strength, back strength, to support the ability to use what we're not using well. And once we start to build it in, we expect in our own throwing, which is going to be low stress, we're going to talk about, we see that being more easily incorporated. Not only that, we've got to train the body to activate all those muscles we talked about as a single unit to produce a speed at the end of the chain. So in this system, we're not just looking at the arm. We're looking at the whole body. We're looking at how the lower half works, how the lower half moves energy to the trunk, how the trunk works, how the trunk moves energy to the arm. We're looking at what we call the kinetic chain. What's the kinetic chain? The ankle links to the knee to the hip to the shoulder to elbow, elbow to the hand. We also know force energy comes from the ground. Gravity holds us down. Wherever there's an action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. We push force to the ground, it pushes back up, and we create propulsion, we create movement. So this is where energy comes from. We have to then learn how to interact with the ground to move the energy up. Guys, already we're enhancing performance without throwing a baseball. Yes, you can take an underdeveloped pitcher. You could even take an average developed pitcher, and you can go through a full assessment, better enhance their kinetic chain, make their kinetic chain more dynamic through Olympic lifting or explosive plyometric training, or both ideally, and you make a better, higher performing pitcher, harder throwing pitcher without ever touching the arm or ragging out the arm. Of course, when the season comes, you have to build that kid up for the volume of throws he's going to handle. So you don't just throw him out and throw 100 pitches at him and it exceed the energy capacity of the muscles in the arm, and the arm goes into fatigue halfway through the workload, which then throws them to overuse, which throws them into injury. You still have to understand how to build stamina on the arm, but you built a system to better produce energy through the whole unit as opposed to just in the arm and you never threw the ball. All right, so we're gonna take a break right there before we move on to some of the drills and how we would actually train it and take some questions. All right, so how do we implement a better kinetic chain, or start, once we start enhancing better use of the lower half, better use of the core, how do we start training that so we can start putting less stress on the arm? So we have a lot of studies that show when stride length decreases, if hips are still rotating at pitch release, there's one more.
Don't stabilize.
Well, that
Hips
too.
don't stabilize.
In this study, the other one was the trunk position. If the trunks are, or the hip position is too ipsilateral, meaning your trunk is leaning to throwing arm side, it puts more compressive forces on your shoulder. Okay. So how do we get away from forcing the shoulder to work harder to generate the speeds? We have to start teaching how energy moves up the kinetic chain. So we like to use the King of the Hill. Okay, here's the King of the Hill. You've never seen it. It's a force plate indicator, gives us an indication of force production. And then we like to use the VeloPro harness. You can get all this at Top Velocity. You go to topvelocity.net, look under products. You can get them separately or with the 3X programs. The King of the Hill is on there and the VeloPro is on there. So the VeloPro puts resistance through your drive leg or front leg and makes it more challenging for you to implement drive. At the same time too, forces you in your load longer, which is huge.
Yep.
Okay. So with those tools, we like to implement a weighted object, but not a weighted ball. So when I pull this out, everybody freaks out, weighted ball. Everyone says weighted ball. Just imagine if this was a weighted ball, okay? The difference between, say, a weighted ball and this medicine ball is that when I throw this, I can crank it up with one arm. When I throw this in our drills, it's meant to be thrown with two arms. What's the difference? So if I'm throwing a weighted ball with one arm, I can easily pull hard, overcompensating with glove side, forcing my arm to hyperangulate a lot easier because the object is heavier. So I'm used to a lighter ball, I hold a heavier ball, better chance when I go to turn, this is gonna pull back harder here and here. That's why we see total range of motion increasing in the 6-week weighted ball study we have from ASMI. The weighted object is forcing the arm to drag or load harder. That's why also you get the velocity increase. More time to put force in the ball, but at the expense of the arm. We need to understand that the delicacies of the arm are in those, the problem is in pushing to max ranges, okay? So for example, if I hyperangulate and I drag the arm behind the back, that's taking the shoulder, the hip and socket here, the shoulder, or the ball and socket of the shoulder, and it's literally dislocating it. See how this doesn't want to go farther back than his elbow to just behind the shoulder? It doesn't want to go farther back because it has to literally start to push out of socket to get behind the back, which would be considered hyperangulation. So when you go behind the back too far with the elbow, you can put this into a position of dislocation, and then it starts to wear out the front of the shoulder or put more stress on deceleration on the back of the shoulder. The other thing is too, is if I force it to externally rotate harder, it can also have, it can have a moment of dislocation too, where it almost wants to, where it has a hard time destabilizing, it almost wants to spin in the joint, okay? So that's where the elbow or the shoulder injury comes into putting too much of a load or too much of a drag on the arm. As far as the elbow, get this back to normal. As far as the elbow, okay, if I bring this up, I think that's close enough. When the elbow is supinated, that means thumb is that way, pronated is thumb is this way. When it's supinated, your basically ulnar can easily separate from the epicondyle, or the tip of the humerus. It just literally, if you can look here, it starts to open up this little gap. That's where the UCL is. There's the flexor mass goes over that to help hold it down, but you're in a position when you put torque on it to open up that gap and tear that UCL. What helps prevent that is earlier pronation can help stabilize that joint and protect that UCL or that pulling open. So when I hyperangulate and I go back here and I have more of a load in supination, now a better chance I'm going to split that gap and tear the UCL. Also too, I'm going to get a lot of this movement, which going forward, I'm going to hold supination longer before I pronate. And once again, it's more time that joint is in that position or supinated in that vulnerable position where the owner is wanting to pull apart like that. So anytime we're in a drill that's forcing the elbow behind the back longer and the arm to supinate longer, better chance of damaging the arm, which once again is going to be in throwing in those arm dragging movements. So weighting balls can easily do that because you got more weight. You might want to overcompensate more because you don't know how to use your kinetic chain. So you start pulling here, you start dragging, you start delaying pronation, and you start damaging your arm very quickly. In the case of Noah, if you didn't hear the interview, that's more than likely what was happening as he added the weight, and that caused his arm to snap. When you grab the medicine ball and you throw it with two hands, where this hand has to always be supporting the ball, you can't pull. So when you can't pull, you're forced to create the movement or the energy with the shoulder rotation and tilts. And therefore the throwing arm can stay engaged with the trunk and ride with the trunk, as opposed to disengaging. As this disengages, that disengages and drags. This forces it to engage and ride the trunk better, and it protects the shoulder and elbow from the added stress. Also too, which is typical of weighted objects, the arm speeds are slowing down and the torques as well are going to slow down. Now, of course, we do eventually start to throw these hard, but you'll find trying to use your arms and the compressive forces of the arms to throw it is a really poor approach. You actually can see your ball speeds go down when you do that because the arm is engaged with the trunk. You're better off accelerating the trunk to accelerate the ball than disengaging the arms to drag the arms to accelerate the ball. That's why this stays healthy on the arm.
Talk to me about how you can't go into as much horizontal abduction with two hands on the ball, and you can't go into as much external rotation.
Good point too. So because you're more engaged with the trunk, you can pull your elbow back, which we want, but you can't once again get caught way back there because you're supporting it with both hands and it's more engaged with the trunk. So you're having less horizontal abduction behind the back and you're having less external rotation because once again, this is supporting it. You start choking yourself. Also too, you're not letting it pull all the way back, disengaged, and it's less stress as well. So it's going to take all the dynamics you could do to your arm and it's going to minimize them because you're forcing it to pull in and engage with the trunk more than disengage with the trunk. So once you do that, you're going to have a challenge. You're going to grab this ball and you're going to go throw it. And if you were this guy wanting to pull and drag, you can't get away with that. And then all of a sudden you got no ball speed. Happens to everyone. Happens to even elite pitchers that come in here. They're like, why do I throw these so slow? Because you're an all-arm guy. Now you got to get good at the trunk movements. And what drives the trunk movements is the hips, and what drives the hips is the legs. So this is where we start to coach the athlete how to engage more of the body when they're in these drills. So the guy comes in the drills. I'm not going to go into depth into how they work because that's a part of the program, but we do them simply first in linear foot positions, and we start first with a simple overhead throw. And you start teaching them to load and drive, popping the plates, separating the lower half from the upper half to transfer energy to the trunk, and then throwing the objects. And then all of a sudden, for them to start accelerating their speeds, they can't do it here. They have to do it through here and through here, not through here. And then we start to build a healthier pitcher who's reducing torques, reducing stress, while they're increasing performance by engaging more of their body. So, show you even more. So we do the overhead throws, then we do the separation throws, and there's series of drills through it. There's 3 drills through each one, and they're for different reasons, and we're helping them. We're doing video analysis, and we're going, hey, you're not loading in your back leg, you're not driving out of your back leg, you're not separating your trunk.
Not stabilizing front leg.
You're not stabilizing front leg. And the thing is the flaws that you have in your pitching delivery with a baseball, when you throw with this 2-pound, become huge. You're now being forced to deal with, you like my huge?
Yeah, like I said.
You're being forced to deal with your issues now, because with this ball, it makes them so much worse than with the baseball. You can get away with so much more with the baseball. You can completely turn your legs off and throw a baseball hard. You can't turn your legs off and throw a med ball hard. So it's gonna be telling you, hey, your legs suck. They're not working. They need to get more involved to get more energy behind your body, to get more energy behind the ball. So our separation throws is almost just like your full delivery, okay? You're gonna lift and drive, pop the plate, separate, shoulders and arm behind the back. When you hear that pop, you're gonna cock, and then you're gonna go through your arm path, where as you go into shoulder rotation, forward tilt, your arm's gonna duct and lay back in external rotation, and follow your trunk into internal rotation with a good front leg. So it's pretty much like this. Okay? And we can get these up to, we've had guys get up to 48 miles an hour with these. One guy up to 50, but not in our facility. And there's a series of drills with that. Then we go to the baseballs. So following that, we go to the baseballs and we perform the same drills. Chest up drill, separation drill, working to incorporate the same movements that use more of the kinetic chain. And once we start to do this, say if a pitcher comes through for the first time and he does these drills, when he gets to the baseball and he throws 2 or 3, the first thing he says is, wow, I don't feel my arm anymore. And most of them are here for velocity, but that's the first thing they say. I don't feel my arm anymore. And that's when they know that incorporating more of the lower half, incorporating more of the trunk, is reducing the stress or the work the arm has to do to put force behind the ball.
Talk a little bit too about when the pro guys come in for like a 4-month off season, how they'll just be sitting here in the weight room training and then practicing their biomechanic movements with these drills before they even start moving to the baseball.
Yeah, when you take someone new to this approach, they first go through a period of unconformity, like, you know, this is not what I'm used to, you're changing me, and then they relax and they let it take hold. And once that happens, you start to see these guys come in and grab these balls and just literally sit, maybe not even throwing them, and focusing on how they're loading and driving and separating, and then slowly work them up into their throws, where a lot of times this is all they want to throw. All they want to throw is this. And we do that with our pro guys. Our pro guys come out of a long season. They don't want to 2 weeks later start throwing again, a lot of them. So we just throw the med balls. So that way, you're putting way less stress on your arm than throwing a baseball. You're incorporating all the body movements. You're discovering what lower body movements or total body movements have atrophied. You're improving them. You're using the kinetic chain through the exact same movements you will with the baseball without putting the stress on the arm. When I first developed these, I said, I've now allowed pitchers to compete with hitters. Hitters can show up every day and hit 200, 300 balls off a tee. Pitchers can't do that. With this ball that doesn't put the stress on the arm, just like a hitter uses his whole body, a pitcher can put in almost the same amount of reps as a hitter can every single day if he wanted to. I mean, I'll have my pro guys throw 150, 200 of these and baseballs, probably 75% of these are rest baseballs, and be blown away that they don't feel soreness or fatigue in their arm after 200 throws. They're blown away. And at the same time too, 3 months, 2 months, 3 months later, they're ball speed's going up higher than it's ever been, and they're once again not milking their arms or having to fight fatigue and soreness in their arms.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Chris Medlin's a great example of that, because when he first came in, it really resonated with me when he's you know, what do you got, 2 Tommy John surgeries? In
2
his
Tommy
arm,
Johns and a
started
rotator
getting
cuff
some rotator
strain.
cuff surgery, and he was saying, like, just the thought of like grabbing a baseball and having to start throwing again would get like a heartbeat going in his arm. And I've had, you know, arm injury in my elbow, and I was the same thing. It's like the thought of like grabbing a ball and trying to throw it as hard as I can was just like, like every throw was like, is it gonna hurt? But he was able to start working in the med ball throws and start refining his biomechanics and fixing the issues that he was overcompensating that was putting so much stress on his arm. And he was able to come in and work with these med ball throws, you know, 3 times a week and be able to start fixing those things. And then over time, when he started blending back into the baseball, he's using his biomechanics better, he's using his legs better, he's using his hips better, he's using his trunk better, and it's putting less stress on his arm. And right now he's in season and reporting good things. So far so good, but I think that's a great example of how it works.
So the Velo Pro, where this helps, a lot of guys, young pitchers or even older pitchers that have had a lot of shoulder, elbow injury in their career, their early transfers, their hyperangulators, they're pretty much early movers. So they can do that with the med ball. They'll start doing the med ball and dragging it. They're still struggling, but you do need to teach them how to sit longer into their back hips to peak their forces later, and the Velo Pro is probably the best tool to train it. So this goes under the heel.
You got it?
This goes under the heel. There's 2 bungees here that strap down to the heel. Actually, I got this on back, of course. It is hard to put on, but once you get it, it works great. Okay. And now you feel this resistance where if I relax my leg, it just does that. Okay, you're pushing down. So you're always staying engaged in your back leg. So what happens, if I transfer early, this will literally pop up on me. So I have to sit and stay engaged longer, and then it allows me to drive and peak my forces later. So, perfect. So I get even in these drills, when I sit here and go through my throw, if I lift and transfer, then that pops up and I lose everything. So it's gonna force me to stay loaded, engaged. And then when I go to drive, even with the King of the Hill plate, it's gonna make it so much harder to drive, adding resistance to my drive. See, I struggled to even drive the plate, but I could feel I stayed so much engaged in my hip, or in my hip so much longer. I had more stability to separate into, delay my trunk into, and then fire my ball into. And the key really to health is the delaying the trunk. If I keep a base here, stability longer, I have something to turn into, as opposed if I'm already transferring, everything's wanting to go. If I'm staying engaged longer, I can delay my trunk longer, and every single study shows late trunk movements, delayed trunk movements, reduce stress to arm. Not only that, they said pro pitchers are able to put less torques on their arm based on their body weight than youth pitchers, high school, college youth pitchers, because they delay their trunks longer. This is the tool that helps you do that by keeping you engaged in your hip longer, so you can turn and counter rotate your trunk and cock your arm and prepare your upper body for launch later in the movement. So this is great to teaching one of the hardest things to learn when you start incorporating more lower half, which is how to load the back leg. It also gives you more resistance to your drive, to build more power to your drive. And on top of it, with the King of the Hill, it's telling you, hey, did I generate enough force? Did I get a bang? Did I get a click? And was that force directional? Because you can only get a bang if you're pushing it back to the rubber. There's no two better tools together to teach you how to engage the lower half through the mechanics like we've defined in 3X pitching. Into my feed, we're about to end it up here, but I was just reiterating how you can see how when we see guys getting injured all the time, when we hear stories like Noah, when we see major leaguers constantly being injured, we question what are they doing in their off season to reduce the stress of the arm, to rebuild the kinetic chain, to re-strengthen the upper body, which is hard to strengthen in a season when you're throwing so much. How well are they doing that to keep themselves healthy? Is it necessary for a young kid coming up to get into a velocity development program that enforces more overuse, doesn't focus on better use of the kinetic chain, or tries to focus on better use of the kinetic chain, but still allowing them to crank up to high intent with more arm drag, more arm load, to where they're more susceptible to injury, where we know the better alternative was not even throwing, was creating an environment for them to learn how well are their hips driving the power through their body, how well is their trunk delaying to drive the power through their body to take the work off the arm. And if they are doing any throwing, is it supporting that? Or is it just going back to supporting more of the overcompensation? That's why we want to do this video. We want to do this video and we want to do this session to show you guys there is a better alternative. We're not just going against weighted ball training or high intent weighted ball training just because we think it's bad, we don't have a better alternative. We have the better alternative. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, this is stuff that you're seeing in the medical studies, and even if you go like on our Instagram, the last post I did on Top Velocity was these doctors talking about the same exact approach, that this is a whole athlete problem. This isn't just an arm problem. They're looking at the entire athlete, where his weaknesses are, because lower extremity weaknesses manifest into upper extremity injuries. So it's not something that Brent's just going through and making up. He's gone through and looked at countless research on hyperangulation, on lower half, on all of this stuff that's manifesting into injuries, and through his own career that he's put together. And really the reason why I wanted to come down and learn from this guy is because to me, he put together a really good program that not only enhances performance, but it's also reducing the risk of injury. That's all I got.
All right, well, I want to take some questions. Let's take some questions to finish this up. Dude, someone stole my water back there. Yeah, so there it is. Take some questions. What do we got?
Someone says you're fat. I'm assuming PHAT could be cool. What's with Syndergaard and his bicep tendonitis? Good question.
So I'd have to break Syndergaard down, but I do see, I've always said with Syndergaard is he has a tight hip. When he gets to front foot, there is a little early trunk tilt and a little late hip rotation. So there is some tightness and inflexibility going on in his hip. I wonder if he's become too quad dominant because he's a big squatter, but I also know he deadlifts. I don't know. Or is it just poor mobility in the hip? Does he have an impingement in the hip? And I think something from the hip is causing that. So if my hip isn't getting through, then my trunk isn't delaying as much, specifically with the early tilt. So when my arm is later, my arm is getting more out in front of the face to finish that energy or finish creating that energy. Because if I had the hip through and I had more time back here, I'd get a lot of the energy back here and then everything can turn over. But if I'm a little bit early and this is late, then everything's kind of finishing a little bit too much out in front of the face, and then that delays into rotation, specifically 100 miles an hour. That's gonna wear down his decelerator. Also too, how much is he working upper body? I'm not sure. He does look like he works his upper body, but it's somewhere linked. It's somewhere linked to the hip. I guarantee it's somewhere linked to the hip. Most studies show most arm injury is coming from a lower half restriction or injury.
Lower extremity weaknesses manifest as upper extremity injuries.
All right, what else? What other questions? Is the Maryland course a 1-day or 2-day, and what's covered? It's just a 1-day course coming up. Can you read that last one?
How come pitchers in the 60s, for example, could pitch so many more innings?
Because they were throwing slower. So it's purely based on velocity. Velocity has a lot to do with arm injury. So in the 60s, it wasn't so competitive, or it wasn't a world sport like it is today. It wasn't as competitive as it is today, to where it's you have to perform at this peak level all the time. So every guy is at almost close to maximum every time, and that's where you're going to get more hurt.
And it's too, like Sandy Koufax, they said has had Tommy John that whole time. They just weren't really aware of those type of things. And he just kept throwing even with the hurt elbow. So I'm sure they still had injury. It just wasn't. They just didn't address it. They were just like, whatever. I got arm pain.
Dang, my iPad or my phone is overheating. iPhone needs to cool, and it just knocked it out. Although that was good. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you again soon.